So I'm going to talk to you about the imperfect. There are two regular past tenses. There's the preterite and then there's the imperfect. We've already talked about the preterite, so we're going to talk now about when to use the imperfect, and then we'll talk about how to form it, and then maybe we'll get into what the difference is between the two. So the imperfect tense, so we're going to look at your book, and then I'm going to pull up another text so we can look at that one as well. But the imperfect tense is used to portray various aspects of the background of a story, details about the context in which the story takes place, such as the time, date, place, weather, etc. So if you are setting up the background to your story, anything that you're using to set up as the background is going to be the imperfect. And we'll go through some examples in a minute. So this example is saying when you tell what time it was when your story took place, when you tell what date it was, when you tell where it took place, and when you tell what the weather was like when your story took place, all of that is going to be in the imperfect. And when we're talking about time, whenever you tell the time, whether you're setting up a story or not, whenever you give the hour, like it was 1 o'clock, it was 2 o'clock, it was 3 o'clock, that's always going to be imperfect. You never put it into the preterite tense. The condition and description of the people in the story. So when you're telling a story, and this doesn't have to be like when you're saying once upon a time, this can be like you're telling gossip, I guess, to a friend, and you're setting up the scene, and then you're going through and telling, you're sharing this gossip. The condition or description of the people in the gossip that you're sharing is going to be into the imperfect. I was very tired. I felt sick. I wasn't wearing glasses. The existence of things that pertain to the story, there was a lot of traffic. To contrast the way things are now and the way they used to be. So when we're setting up the background of a story, then we're going to, and when we're describing the people who are in the story, we're going to use the imperfect. We're also going to use the imperfect to contrast the way things are now and the way they used to be. Ahora hablo español y portugués, antes solo hablaba inglés. So now I speak Spanish and Portuguese, but before I used to only speak English. And often that used to, whenever you can translate something as used to is imperfect. Antes tenía muchos amigos, ahora solo tengo 2 o 3. So before I used to have a lot of friends, now I only have 2 or 3. So whenever you're saying used to have, used to do, used to dance, that's going to be imperfect. When you talk about habitual actions in the past, something that you did repeatedly, you're going to use the imperfect. Cuando era niño, íbamos a la escuela a pie porque no había autobuses escolares. So, and when you see phrases like when I was a child, when I was young, so de niño, cuando era niño, cuando era joven, when you see expressions like that where you're setting up the your life phase, you're going to use the imperfect. Antes no salía nunca de noche, no me gustaba. In the past, I didn't go out at night, I didn't like it. Often when we're talking about habitual actions, you're going to see words in your sentence that would imply repetition, and I'll pull some of those up in a minute. Okay, so that's what your book says. Let's look at this one. Okay, so when do we use the imperfect? The Spanish imperfect has 3 common English equivalents: the simple past, the past progressive, and the used to plus infinitive construction. So Rosario trabajaba en la tienda could be translated as Rosario worked at the store, Rosario is working at the store, Rosario used to work at the store. Use the imperfect to describe repeated, habitual, or continuous actions in the past with no reference to the beginning or end. So there's no words in the sentence that say that you worked yesterday or that you went to eat last week. Cuando yo trabajaba en el almacén, recibía un descuento en todo lo que compraba. That implies repetition. When I worked, or when I used to work at the department store, or when I worked at the department store, I used to receive a discount in everything that I used to buy. So that's all in the imperfect cause. It implies repetition. No había nadie en el centro comercial. There was no one in the mall. So the imperfect of I is había. Use the imperfect to describe an event or action in progress when another event or action takes place or is occurring. So, estábamos en la tienda cuando llegaron nuestras amigas. So, if you're in the middle of doing something, like we were in the store when our friends arrived, if you're in the middle of doing something and you get interrupted, the thing you were in the middle of doing is in the imperfect and the interruption is in the preterite. But if you wanted to say that you were kind of doing two things at the same time, mientras Rosario, or that two people, something was happening simultaneously, then you can use imperfect. Mientras Rosario compraba un bolso. So while Rosario was buying a purse, Mauricio was looking at sweaters. And that's the ing. So if you can translate what you're trying to say, if what you're trying to say is ing in English, that's always going to be the imperfect. Use the imperfect to describe characteristics or states of being. So when you talk about, there are two types of verb. There's states of being verbs and there's action verbs. If it's a state of being verb, most of the time it's going to go in the imperfect, unless you know for a fact that your subject no longer feels that way. So when you have states of being verbs like, so when you have words like want, hope, desire, need, have, is, am, are. These are states of being verbs. They tend to be in the imperfect unless there's something that lets you know that the state has ended. And the imperfect generally is used with time and age in the past. So when you tell how old you were and you tell what time it was, you're going to use the imperfect. Okay, so I wanted to look at this one and just see if this could give us some ideas of how to use the imperfect as well. This whole thing is done in the imperfect and the verbs are already conjugated for, so let's just kind of figure out why we're using the imperfect, okay? So it says, en el mercado de Otavalo, el mercado de pueblo de Otavalo, Ecuador es famoso por sus artesanías, su comida típica y los turistas que lo visitan. Usa el imperfecto de los verbos entre paréntesis para completar la entrada que escribió un turista en su diario cuando él y su hermana lo visitaron. So this is a diary entry, okay? So it's going to read a lot like a story. Okay, so el pueblo de Otavalo está situado a 3 horas de Quito. So the town of Otavalo is located 3 hours from Quito, or outside of Quito. Ese día hacía mucho calor y el cielo estaba despejado. So here we're being told what the weather is, but we're setting up the background for the story. So on this day, it was really hot and the sky was clear. There weren't any clouds in the sky. Nuestro taxista se llamaba Ramón. Our taxi driver called himself Ramón. And this goes back to here, where you're told that the condition or description of the people in the story tends to be in the imperfect. So this is describing a person who's in the story. Which would be our taxi driver. Also, so this is, again, setting up the background. We're setting up the mood. We're describing the characters in our story, and we're describing the background of our story, so we're using the imperfect. Y era muy simpático. This, again, is description of our character in a story. Ramón era muy simpático. Otavalo parecía una ciudad impresionante. So Otavalo seemed to be an impressive city. Again, we're still just setting up the background for our story. Había gente por todas partes vendiendo verduras, pollos, todo tipo de comida, ropa, etc. So there were people all around selling vegetables, chicken, all types of food, clothes, etc. So again, we're still setting up the background for that story. No podía, I couldn't believe, or we couldn't believe, because he's there with his brother, no podíamos creer el espectáculo tan agradable de colores y olores. We couldn't believe the super nice spectacle of colors and smells. En uno de los puestos, algunas mujeres, so in one of the stalls, some women were buying bracelets, and another, en otro, un hombre vendía camisas de algodón, and another, a man was selling cotton shirts. So again, we're still setting up this whole background. Also, you hear me using were buying in one of the stalls. Some women were buying bracelets, and another, a man was selling cotton shirts. Whenever you're using ing in English in the past, that is the imperfect tense. Muchas personas compraban verduras, cebollas, ajos, etc. So there were a lot of people buying. You hear me again using the ing, vegetables, onions, garlic, etc. En un lugar, algunas personas preparaban un cochinillo a la parrilla. So in another area, there were some people who were preparing a little pig on the grill. Por todas partes, los clientes y los vendedores regateaban. So all over, por todas partes and all over the market, the customers and the salespeople were bargaining the price of their things. Cuando por fin dejamos Otavalo, eran las 2 de la tarde. This is the hour. Whenever you give the hour, you have to use the imperfect. La hora del almuerzo. Estábamos exhaustos pero contentos. We were exhausted but happy. And again, that's a state. So often when we're talking about an emotional state, we tend to put it into the imperfect. Okay, and this is a paragraph that you guys read in class the other day, and I just wanted to contrast this one with the diary entry. So the diary entry has this feel of you narrating an event in your past. This is more you telling one event that's over and done with. It's talking about the shopping that Rosario, the chef at the restaurant Cocina Porteña, and his assistant did last week. So last week, my assistant and I, we decided to go shopping at Nuevo Jumbo that opened recently and at Unicentro de Santiago. Because we have last week, we know that it's over and done with. When we arrived there, we found a big section of fruits and vegetables, others of meats and fish, and finally all classes of drinks. We bought food and also things for the kitchen. What temptation! I bought a big pot, and my assistant bought an iron skillet. Afterwards, we ate a snack in the restaurant that is in the supermarket. My assistant asked for a lemon pie, and I asked for an apple pie. The waiter served us coffee with our pastry. So you can kind of hear this is a more abrupt telling as opposed to the other one, which was setting up more of a mood. This is more relating facts. The other one is trying to establish mood. So if you're trying to relate facts and it's things that are over and done with, you're going to put it into the preterite. And if you're trying to establish more of a mood in what you're saying, you're going to put it into the imperfect. Okay?